And now, the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a space for ideas and reflections in our uncertain times.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. It was a bright summer's day, normal in every way. Children played on the monkey bars, laughter rising against the quiet. The climbing frame stood pressed against the tree and the hedge, sparse in places unremarkable. From the other side of the hedge, a neighbour's voice drifted through, female, mid-40s, words indistinct. Then everything paused. A shape emerged, not from the ground, not through branches, but in front of the hedge. Black, voided, the silhouette of a head and torso, three-dimensional yet absent of light. It hovered 1 or 2 feet away, not moving, not floating, gliding without direction. Stillness with momentum, the space around it folded and shifted. Depth became unstable. Edges refused clarity. The shape disrupted dimension. It was unplaceable. It felt a moment frozen, without emotion, only wonder. An encounter with the anomalous rarely announces itself as anomaly. It enters through stillness, through a break in the habitual, and alters the grammar of perception. What appeared in front of the hedge was not terrifying. It was incompatible. It resisted being registered as object, intention, or presence. It was not what it did, but what it undid. The scene did not grow uncanny because of the shape. The shape revealed the uncanny as always present, waiting in the folds of the ordinary. To name this event as high strangeness is not to label it, but to indicate the failure of labeling itself. The term holds a space for what perception cannot stabilize. Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis, an astrophysicist and a theoretical physicist known for their serious study of unidentified aerial phenomena, propose a 6-layer model for such events. They are not theorizing in the abstract. They are building a philosophical scaffold for the real that breaks under conventional weight. Their model begins where empirical description falters, where the thing seen fractures not only what we see, but how seeing is organized. The anomalous here is not a mystery to solve. It is a structure that resists being reduced. It does not contradict known reality. It creates a moment where reality ceases to be knowable in familiar terms. The hedge, the sun, the voice, all continued. But something else entered, or emerged, or was always there, unregistered until the perceptual field destabilized just enough for it to bleed through. Vallée and Davis do not treat such phenomena as hallucinations, nor as simple technological intrusions. They insist on multiplicity, that the event occurs simultaneously across physical, psychological, symbolic, and informational registers. It leaves no stable evidence, but it alters the witness, and that alteration becomes the trace. The moment does not persist in memory as confusion. It persists as structure, a structure that changed how reality itself could be imagined. Orthodoxy recoils from moments like these, not because they are implausible, but because they are uncontainable. Traditional epistemologies require events to be either real or imagined, natural or artificial, explainable or false. The encounter at the hedge does not comply. It leaves no artifact, emits no sound, resists measurement. And yet it imprints itself onto perception with more clarity than many so-called facts. The orthodox response is to pathologize the witness or dismiss the event, not because either position is proven, but because their frameworks cannot survive the ambiguity. This is precisely the space where Vallée and Davis intervene. Their 6-layer model is not a claim to truth, but an architecture for holding complexity. Each layer, physical, physiological, psychological, information-based, cultural and social, describes a dimension in which the anomalous acts. None are sufficient alone. Together they suggest that the phenomenon does not belong to a single domain of reality, but drifts between them, destabilizing the walls meant to separate body from world, mind from matter, signal from story. The physiological layer treats the body as instrument. It asks not what was seen, but what was registered beneath vision. Nausea, time distortion, electrical sensitivities. The event at the hedge may not have left a mark on the world, but it may have repatterned the nervous system of the witness. The psychological layer traces shifts in attention, memory, dream life. The information layer engages the strange semiotics of the phenomenon, how it behaves as if it carries intent, even without transmission. And the social layer maps how meaning is managed, what is allowed to be said and what becomes unspeakable. Each layer is a pressure, not an explanation. The model doesn't flatten the event, it fractures our assumptions. It tells us that the anomalous is not unreal, but that it resists any singular registration of the real. When something glides into view without origin or anchor, it is not just the object that is strange, it is the world that becomes reformed around it. Space, time, depth, relation, all recalibrated. The hedge no longer marks the edge of a garden. It becomes a threshold for what thought has not prepared to receive. And perhaps this is what makes the event unforgettable, not its content, but the structural disturbance it initiates. What Vallée and Davis are proposing is not merely a taxonomy, but an ethics of perception. To encounter the anomaly is to be inducted into a new responsibility, to remain with what cannot be resolved, to allow complexity without distortion, and to treat impossibility as a legitimate state of contact. The next day, everything had been completely forgotten and never spoken. The shape by the hedge left no residue in language, no shared reflection, no urgency to make sense. It was as though the moment had sealed itself, protected from memory by its own structural dissonance. But then it happened again, this time inside the house, in the kitchen, in broad daylight. A tall, human-shaped figure emerged. Not stepped in, emerged. It was voided out, like a blank in the texture of space. Not absence, but active erasure. Like a non-playable character in a game you've yet to unlock, there, but not permitted. Its presence was wrong, not because it threatened, but because it violated the conditions of presence itself. It half-glided, half-walked. The movement was both too smooth and slightly jagged, like something mimicking physics without understanding it. The contrast between its void form and the clarity of the kitchen, light on metal, pale tiles, the hum of the fridge produced a kind of cognitive rupture. For 7 seconds, reality cracked, not exploded, not broke. Cracked. Just enough to notice the fracture. Time did not stop. It slipped. The moment felt externally imposed. A frame dropped into the sequence of the day. Then it was gone. Events like this are not remembered in narrative. They are registered in structure. They do not present as trauma or vision, but as misalignment. The world continues, but slightly off-axis. Objects retain shape, but lose context. Meaning hovers, but refuses binding. This is the epistemic terrain Vallée and Davis seek to name. Their model assumes that these events are not reducible to psychology or physics alone. They are composite ruptures, distributed impossibilities, and their recurrence suggests a pattern, not of content, but of interruption. To say it happened again is not to imply repetition. It is to note another breach in the architecture of the real. The voided figure in the kitchen was not a continuation of the hedge event. It was a reinforcement, a recursive pressure, an insistence from elsewhere that the logic of the visible is not sovereign, that perception itself is porous, that matter can be inhabited by something that bays no known form of inhabitation. The event was not symbolic, it was structural, and its demand was not belief, but accommodation. The 6-layer model proposed by Vallée and Davis does not aim to explain the phenomenon in the way science typically demands. It does not ask what the figure was or how it came to appear. Instead, it maps the dimensions through which the phenomenon exerts pressure, on perception, on language, on systems of sense-making. Each layer is a domain of disruption, a field where the anomaly leaves residue not in evidence, but in altered relation. The first layer is the physical. Here, the focus is on material traces, electromagnetic effects, physiological anomalies, and measurable disruptions to the environment. In many reports, these are fleeting or absent, but the absence is not nothing. It is a signature of evasiveness. In this case, the kitchen remained untouched. No object moved, no light changed, but the presence itself defied physical anchoring. It was not a being within space. It was a displacement of space itself. The laws of proximity bent around it, not broken, just made irrelevant. The second is physiological. This layer concerns the body's reaction to the encounter. Often witnesses report nausea, paralysis, skin sensations, or shifts in time perception. But what marked this moment was subtler, a flat affect, no terror, no excitement. The body's emotional palette seemed muted, suspended, as if whatever appeared brought with it a modulation of experience, stripping the moment of the urgency it would otherwise carry. The nervous system registered the anomaly, but translated it in the most domesticated key possible. Oh. The third layer is psychological, not in the clinical sense, but as a space where consciousness is strained. Dreams change, memory distorts, narratives collapse. In this model, the figure is not just a visual oddity, but a cognitive destabilizer. It does not traumatize, it unsettles the architecture that sorts the real from the unreal. Why was the moment accepted so calmly? Why does it resist integration afterward? This psychological indifference is not apathy. It is evidence of interference at the root level of perception. Layer 4 is informational. Here, the phenomenon is treated as a transmission, not necessarily of data, but of pattern. Some events appear to carry symbolic weight, or to generate meaningful coincidences in their wake. Others seem to act like encrypted messages, not in content but in form. The figure did not speak, it did not signal, but its presence altered the cadence of the day. 7 seconds became a kind of bracket, a frame that changed what came before and after, not through content but through interruption. Each of these layers refuses reduction. Together, they form a topology of encounter, a way to stay with the event without collapsing it into metaphor, delusion, or doctrine. The model does not simplify. It gives shape to complexity. It says, this is not one thing because it cannot be. The phenomenon is not waiting to be decoded, it is waiting to be held in a structure that will not flinch. The fifth layer is cultural. It asks how a society metabolizes the anomalous, not whether it believes in it, but how it frames it, where it buries it, what narratives it permits around it. In most modern contexts, events like the kitchen encounter are swiftly categorized as hallucination, fantasy, or entertainment. The culture does not deny that people see things. It denies that what they see might restructure the categories through which seeing is understood. This is not skepticism, it is containment. Culture acts not to interrogate the strange, but to neutralize its contagion. The sixth and final layer is social. It traces what happens to witnesses, not just internally, but relationally. Who can they tell? What are the costs of speaking? What institutions are prepared to hold such testimony? Often the answer is none. The witness becomes an epistemic orphan, untethered from the frameworks that once allowed them to name and share experience. Silence then is not forgetting. It is a survival response to having encountered something untranslatable. Not because the event resists language, but because language is not permitted to stretch that far in public. Vallée and Davis insist that none of these layers are primary. The model is not hierarchical. It is recursive. Events move through the layers fluidly, sometimes touching all, sometimes only a few. What gives the model its power is not that it explains the anomaly, but that it outlines where and how explanation begins to unravel. The anomaly becomes visible not as content, but as pressure, a sustained contradiction that cannot be resolved without reconfiguring the system that registers it. This is what makes the kitchen encounter more than anecdote. It becomes an entry point into a topology where reality does not hold still. The event may seem small, but it reverberates structurally. Something entered and exited within 7 seconds, but in doing so, it exposed the architecture of the real as contingent, not broken, not false, but susceptible to other orders, other logics. The model makes it possible to stay with this without being pulled toward resolution or denial. It gives form to what resists form. And in this, it performs a deeper philosophical move. It suggests that our failure to comprehend may itself be diagnostic, that what breaks our systems is not a flaw but a clue. The anomaly is not a riddle to solve, but a mirror held up to the limits of our current ontologies. The model does not tell us what the phenomenon is. It tells us what kind of world would have to exist for it to be possible. To imagine such a world is not to retreat into fantasy. It is to accept that our existing epistemic architectures are partial, contingent, and perhaps obsolete in the face of certain experiences. The 6-layer model does not dismantle science or discredit rationality. It asks whether our tools of knowing were ever designed to apprehend what refuses submission. The anomaly becomes a kind of philosophical pressure test, not on the event, but on the frameworks we use to contain it. If reality can host such moments, then our job is not to flatten them into familiarity, but to evolve our capacity for attention. Attention here is not passive, it is a structuring force. To attend to the anomalous is to change the shape of what can be perceived. And this is perhaps the most disquieting implication of the model, that the anomaly does not exist out there, waiting to be encountered. It may require the witness to participate in its unfolding. Not in the sense of projection or invention, but in the sense that reality is relational and certain phenomena emerge only in that relation. The anomaly, then, is not simply witnessed, it coalesces through the act of witnessing. This reframes the figure in the kitchen. It did not appear in the traditional sense. It emerged into a perceptual field that momentarily softened its boundaries. Its existence was not declared, it was permitted, not by will, but by fracture, a slip in the ordinary that allowed a different register of reality to surface. The figure's presence was not content-rich. It did not deliver a message, emit light, or behave according to any familiar intention, but it enacted a reordering, a gentle but undeniable shift in the fabric of the real. And the response, so notably subdued, so eerily mundane, becomes part of that reordering. The flatness of effect, the calm reception of something utterly incompatible, suggests not psychological repression, but a modulation imposed by the event itself. The anomaly does not only distort time and space, it alters the emotional scaffolding that makes meaning feel urgent. It reduces panic, it withdraws symbolic pressure. It arrives not as spectacle, but as redesign. What the model permits is a way to trace that redesign without turning it into narrative. It offers a vocabulary for registering the shifts, material, bodily, cognitive, cultural, without forcing them into coherence. It lets the event remain plural. In doing so, it positions the witness not as interpreter, but as carrier, someone through whom the real has moved, leaving behind not answers, but new dimensions of disorientation that feel less like confusion and more like an invitation to perceive differently. To perceive differently is not simply to expand awareness, it is to accept that the conditions for awareness itself may be unstable. In the six-layer model, perception is no longer the passive receipt of external signals. It is an event site, a co-generated field in which reality and observer continuously reshape each other. The anomalous exposes this. It doesn't deliver new facts. It rearranges the relation between fact, meaning, and attention. And in doing so, it initiates a slow, recursive transformation, not of belief, but of ontology. This is why the model resists final explanation. Its aim is not to close the question, but to protect the conditions under which the question remains alive. High strangeness does not collapse into myth, hallucination, or technology, because those categories depend on resolution. What happened in the kitchen cannot be made sense of because sense-making itself was the target of disruption. The event was not beyond meaning. It destabilized the apparatus by which meaning is assigned. And that destabilization didn't feel catastrophic, it felt ordinary. That feeling, the O, returns here as philosophical artifact, not a dismissal, but a structural signature. In the presence of the voided figure, emotional intensity was displaced by a kind of cognitive flatness, not confusion, not awe, something quieter. The response itself bore the trace of the phenomenon. It already modulated the field of affect before recognition could fully arrive. This is not evidence of shock or repression. It is further proof that the anomaly is participatory, altering not just the environment, but the experience of experiencing. And this is perhaps the model's most radical implication, that the anomalous does not only appear in the world, it modifies the protocols by which the world is constituted. It inserts itself not as content, but as recursive logic, a form that bends other forms, an event that leaves no evidence but continues to pressure the structures around it. The figure is gone, the kitchen unchanged, yet the architecture of the real is no longer sealed. This leaves the witness in a peculiar position. They are not a source of knowledge, nor a casualty of the inexplicable. They are now a site of interference. A body that has registered a pressure that cannot be named. And the model makes room for this. Without pathology, without mythology, without demand. It allows the experience to remain unfinished, not to preserve mystery, but to respect the kind of truth that only appears when coherence is withheld, the truth of an event that reorganizes the real, not by revealing itself, but by refusing to resolve. To live with such an event is to inhabit a reality that no longer offers the same assurances. The anomaly doesn't linger visibly, but its residue embeds itself in perception. It does not haunt, it recalibrates. The witness walks through familiar rooms that now feel fractionally misaligned, speaks sentences that no longer rest on firm ground. This is not a trauma response. It is an ontological shift. The world has not become threatening, it has become porous. And the porousness is not terrifying. It is quiet, spatial, and irreversible. The six-layer model does not guide the witness back to stability. It does not seek to integrate the experience into existing narrative frameworks. It traces how those frameworks fail, productively, revealingly, necessarily. The event does not return in memory as image or conclusion, but as architecture. It changes what structures memory itself. The ordinary becomes laced with recursive attention. Shadows become thresholds. Stillness becomes potential. The model gives shape to this transformation, not to fix it, but to track its unfolding. There is no mastery offered here, no final account, no unifying insight. What Vallée and Davis propose is a system for remaining with contradiction, with fragmentation, with complexity that refuses to collapse. They reject the orthodox demand that events be either real or false, either inside the mind or outside the body. The anomaly in their framing exists in the space where those binaries dissolve, not as metaphor but as function. It performs the instability we are taught to fear, and in performing it, it reveals the poverty of our existing categories. The kitchen in this light becomes a site not of visitation, but of interference, a room where something passed through, not spatially but structurally. The walls did not bend, but something in the witness's orientation to walls, to space, to presence itself, was rewritten. It was not an event in time, but a fold in time's architecture, a brief undoing of the ordinary so complete that its strangeness arrived already domesticated, a moment of impossible clarity experienced as mild recognition. And this perhaps is the most disquieting dimension. Not that the phenomenon was incomprehensible, but that it was absorbed so seamlessly, that something extraordinary could unfold without resistance, without cognitive rupture, without the dramatic grammar we assign to revelation. The witness did not change their life. They did not report the event. They did not seek answers. But from that moment, the world could no longer be entirely trusted to remain itself, not in a paranoid sense, in a structural one. The anomaly did not destabilize the world. It revealed the world as always already unstable, coherent only because we agree to stop noticing its fractures. The six-layer model does not explain this away. It honors it. It allows the event to remain incomplete, to retain its capacity to reconfigure, to echo forward not as memory but as structure. And in that echo, the witness does not become a believer or skeptic. They become a vector, an opening through which the strange continues to press against the real. The question that remains is not what the figure was or why it came, but what kind of perception must be cultivated to meet it without distortion. The anomaly, as framed by Vallée and Davis, is not a test of belief. It is a mirror held up to the boundaries of attention. It asks whether we are willing to relinquish the demand for closure long enough to register something that does not want to be known in familiar terms. It does not beg to be understood. It holds its shape only through indeterminacy, and its power lies precisely in its refusal to collapse into either subject or object. This is where the six-layer model performs its most important function, not as an answer to high strangeness, but as an ethic of structural hospitality. It does not solve the event. It creates a container wide enough to let the event retain its contradictions without being exiled. The layers, physical, physiological, psychological, informational, cultural, social, are not steps in a sequence, but vectors of impact. Together they offer a way to live alongside the unresolved, to register its movements without arresting them. They form a shape not around the phenomenon, but around our response to it. And perhaps that is what has changed, not the world, but the posture toward it. After the kitchen, after the hedge, the witness doesn't speak of transformation. They speak less. There is no doctrine, no conversion, no obsession. Just a shift, subtle but irreversible in how the ordinary is inhabited. The world continues to function, but now it feels provisional, its textures less fixed, its patterns less complete. It holds something that can no longer be named, and because it cannot be named, it begins to feel alive in a different way. This is not a descent into mysticism. It is an ascent into complexity. The essay does not ask the reader to believe in the event. It asks them to consider what reality must be if such events can occur without shattering it. The anomaly does not fracture the real. It reveals the real as plural, recursive, intermittently accessible. And in that revelation, it issues a quiet demand, not for explanation, but for a perceptual ethics that can hold the unresolvable without fear and the incomprehensible without escape. The witness is left not with knowledge, but with a fold in the structure of the known, and that fold does not close. It expands slowly, quietly, structurally, until the next interference, until the next O. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. For further reading, research, and ways to support the podcast, please visit the episode webpage. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.